You think you know who holds the power in a room, but arrogance is a dangerous blinder. When a struggling single dad is brutally fired just before his daughter's surgery, the corporate vultures who humiliated him thought they had crushed a nobody. They didn't know the quiet man fetching their coffee owned the building, the company, and their entire futures. This is the story of the ultimate mistake, a secret billionaire, and the one phone call that burned a toxic empire to the ground. Thomas Harper did not look like a man who could end careers with a whisper. On a rain-swept Tuesday morning in Seattle, he looked exactly like what his badge proclaimed him to be. A Level 3 data analyst for Meridian Logistics, a massive subsidiary of the global conglomerate, Kensington Holdings. His beige trench coat was frayed at the cuffs. The dark circles under his hazel eyes spoke of endless nights, balancing spreadsheets and soothing a 6-year-old's nightmares. At 6:02 a.m., Tom was already awake, carefully measuring out a dose of pediatric asthma medication for his daughter, Lily. Her breathing had been shallow lately. The upcoming specialist appointment was going to cost a small fortune, and the company health insurance was the only shield keeping them from financial ruin. Or so it seemed. Daddy? Lily rubbed her eyes, her blonde curls a messy halo against the cheap cotton pillowcase. Are you going to the big building again? I am, sweetie, Tom smiled, his voice dropping into that warm, reassuring register reserved exclusively for her. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Mrs. Higgins will be here in 10 minutes to walk you to school. You be good for her, okay? Will you bring home pizza? Only if you eat your broccoli at lunch. Tom walked out of his modest 2-bedroom apartment, pulling up the collar of his coat against the biting wind. He drove a 10-year-old sedan with a failing alternator to the towering glass and steel monolith downtown. To the outside world, Thomas Harper was a grieving widower, a man whose ambition had died alongside his wife 3 years ago in a tragic car accident, leaving him desperate for the mundane stability of middle management. But Meridian Logistics didn't know the truth. They didn't know that his late wife, Clara Kensington, was the visionary founder of Kensington Holdings. They didn't know that upon her death, Tom had inherited a staggering 51% of the voting shares of a $60 billion empire. Crushed by grief and terrified of the cutthroat corporate predators who would target Lily, Tom had walked away. He handed the public reins to Clara's fiercely intelligent sister, Victoria, and buried himself in anonymity. He wanted to understand the company from the ground up, to hide in plain sight, to heal in the quiet hum of a cubicle. Unfortunately, his chosen sanctuary was run by tyrants. Stepping off the elevator on the 42nd floor, Tom immediately felt the oppressive atmosphere. The Seattle branch was managed by Richard Davies, a man whose tailored Armani suits could not hide a profound lack of actual talent. Richard survived by taking credit for the brilliance of his subordinates and ruling through intimidation. "Harper!" The sharp bark echoed across the bullpen. Tom paused, gripping his worn briefcase. He turned to see Chad Montgomery leaning against a mahogany desk. Chad was a 24-year-old junior vice president, a title he had earned purely because his father played golf with the regional director. Chad wore a smug smirk, an ostentatious Rolex, and too much cologne. "Chad," Tom said evenly. "Good morning?" "It's not a good morning, Tom. The Q3 projections for the Horizon contract are a mess. I told you I needed them formatted for my presentation at noon. I sent them to your inbox at 2 a.m., Chad. They are fully formatted, cross-referenced, and I included the risk assessment models you asked for." Chad waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at the screen. "Yeah, well, the font looks weird, and I need you to write my talking points. Make it sound punchy. You know, visionary." Tom's jaw tightened. The Horizon contract was a multi-million-dollar logistics overhaul for a major retail chain. Tom had done 100% of the research, the modeling, and the strategy. Chad was merely going to stand in front of the board and read Tom's words. I have my own quarterly reports to file, Chad. If I don't finish them by 5, HR will dock my performance review. Chad stepped closer, his smirk widening into a sneer. Look, Tom, we all know you're struggling. Single dad, dead wife, all that heavy baggage. Richard and I are doing you a favor keeping you on. You're lucky you have this job. The least you can do is make sure I look good today. Otherwise, I might have to have a chat with Brenda in HR about your time management issues. Didn't your kid just get sick again? Would be a shame to lose that premium medical coverage. The threat was naked, cruel, and precise. A dark, dangerous fire flickered in Tom's eyes, a remnant of the ruthless boardroom tactician he used to be. For a fraction of a second, Chad took a step back, suddenly feeling like a mouse trapped in a cage with a sleeping lion. But Tom blinked, swallowing his pride, pulling the mask of the beaten-down single father firmly back in place. I'll have the talking points on your desk by 11, Tom said quietly. Good man, Chad chuckled, his false bravado returning. Now be a pal and grab me a macchiato, skim milk. Tom walked to his cubicle, sitting heavily in the ergonomic chair. He pulled out his phone and looked at the lock screen. A picture of Clara and Lily laughing on a beach in Carmel. Just a little longer, Tom thought. Just until Lily's surgery is done and she's stable. He opened a blank document and began to write the presentation that would seal his own demise. Noon arrived with the heavy tension of an impending storm. The executive conference room was packed. Richard Davies sat at the head of the long oak table, projecting an air of supreme authority. Around him were executives from the retail client, demanding assurances that Meridian Logistics could handle their supply chain without catastrophic bottlenecks. Tom sat in the back corner, invisible, a ghost taking minutes on a company-issued laptop. Chad stood at the front of the room, clicking through the slide deck Tom had built. For the first 10 minutes, Chad was flying high, reciting Tom's punchy talking points with the hollow charisma of a used car salesman. But then, the client's lead operations manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, held up a hand. Hold on, Mr. Montgomery, Sarah interrupted. Slide 14, you're proposing a hub-and-spoke distribution model for the Pacific Northwest, but your fuel cost projections seem completely divorced from the current crude oil spikes. Walk me through your contingency algorithm here. Chad froze. A deer caught in the headlights of an 18-wheeler. He blinked, looking at the complex graph on the screen. He had no idea what a contingency algorithm was. He hadn't even read the footnotes Tom had provided. Well, Sarah, Chad stammered, his neck flushing red. The algorithm it's robust. We have a highly robust approach to fuel. It scales. Scales how? Sarah pressed, her tone turning icy. If diesel goes up another 40 cents, this entire margin collapses. How did you stress test this data? Richard Davies shifted uncomfortably in his chair, shooting daggers at Chad. Chad, answer the question. Chad looked around, desperate. His eyes landed on Tom in the corner. Our data team, well, the raw data was compiled by Harper here. He might have missed a variable. Tom stopped typing. The room went silent, all eyes turning to the man in the frayed beige suit in the corner. Chad was throwing him under the bus in real time, sacrificing him to save his own skin. Tom stood up, projecting his voice calmly and clearly. Actually, if you refer to Appendix C in your printed packets, you'll see the stress test models. The algorithm accounts for up to a 70-cent fluctuation in diesel prices by dynamically rerouting non-essential freights to our rail partners. The margin doesn't collapse. It temporarily shifts to a slightly longer delivery window for Tier 3 goods, preserving the profit margin on high-priority items. Sarah Jenkins quickly flipped to Appendix C, her eyes scanning the page. Her severe expression softened into genuine impressed surprise. Brilliant. That's highly sophisticated. You built this model, Mr. Harper? I did, Tom said quietly. Then why isn't he the one giving the presentation? Sarah asked, looking directly at Richard Davies. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard forced a tight, artificial laugh. Thomas is a valued behind-the-scenes analyst. Chad oversees the macro vision. Let's move on, shall we? The meeting ended in a resounding success for Meridian Logistics. The client signed the contract. But as the executives filed out of the room, the air grew incredibly toxic. 10 minutes later, Tom received a ping on his computer. My office. Now. Richard. Tom closed his laptop, taking a deep breath. He walked down the carpeted hallway and stepped into Richard's spacious corner office. Chad was already there, pacing furiously. Brenda Walsh, the icy director of human resources, sat rigidly on the leather sofa, a thick file resting on her lap. Close the door, Harper, Richard snapped. Tom closed it. The client signed. We secured a $20 million account. You humiliated me in front of the board, Chad yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Tom. You deliberately sabotaged my presentation to make yourself look smart. You didn't read the material, Chad, Tom replied, his voice frighteningly calm. I answered the client's question to save the account. Enough! Richard slammed his hand on the desk. You don't speak to a vice president that way, Harper. You are a low-level data cruncher. You stepped out of line, deliberately undermined your superior, and displayed gross insubordination. Tom looked at Richard. Insubordination? I did his job for him. I've been doing his job for him for 6 months. Brenda Walsh cleared her throat, opening the file. Thomas, let's keep this professional. We have been reviewing your performance metrics, and frankly, there are glaring issues. Missing deadlines, excessive absences. I took 3 approved sick days when my daughter was in the hospital with pneumonia, Tom stated, his blood beginning to run cold. Be that as it may, Brenda continued, adjusting her glasses. The company requires reliability. Furthermore, Chad has brought to our attention that several expense reports filed under your department have severe irregularities, thousands of dollars misappropriated. Tom stared at them. The audacity was breathtaking. Chad was notorious for using company funds for lavish dinners, weekend trips to Vegas, and high-end escorts, expensing it all under client outreach. They were pinning Chad's embezzlement on him. You're framing me, Tom said flatly. You're taking his fraudulent expenses and attaching them to my login. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face. Prove it. You're a nobody, Harper. Chad is on a fast track to corporate. We can't have a rogue analyst creating toxic work environments and stealing from the company. Brenda, what's the standard protocol here? Immediate termination, Brenda said, without a trace of human empathy. For cause, which means no severance and immediate cancellation of all company benefits, including health insurance, effective at 5 p.m. today. Tom felt a physical punch to his chest. The insurance. Lily's pulmonary specialist appointment was on Friday. Without that insurance, the out-of-pocket costs were impossible on his current fake salary. You can't do this, Tom's voice cracked. It was the first time they had seen him show weakness, and they reveled in it. My daughter has a severe condition. She needs that coverage. Fire me if you want, but code it as a layoff. Give me Cobra. Give me the severance. Chad laughed. A genuine, cruel laugh. Oh, is the little single daddy gonna cry? Should have thought about your kid before you tried to embarrass me, Tom. Actions have consequences. Now get out of here and pack up your cheap plastic desk. Tom looked at the 3 of them. Richard, smug and powerful. Brenda, cold and compliant. Chad, arrogant and cruel. He didn't beg. He didn't yell. The panic that had briefly surfaced for his daughter vanished, replaced by a terrifying glacial calm. The mask of Thomas Harper, the beaten-down widower, fractured and fell away, revealing the man beneath. I see, Tom said softly. He looked directly into Richard's eyes. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this, Richard? I am giving you one final chance to rethink this decision. Richard scoffed. Is that a threat, Harper? What are you going to do, sue us? With what lawyer? Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. We're done here. Tom nodded slowly. Yes, we are. The walk of shame was designed to be as humiliating as possible. 2 burly security guards flanked Tom as he returned to the bullpen. The entire floor had stopped working, eyes glued to the spectacle. Whispers echoed over the cubicle walls. Tom grabbed a small cardboard box. He didn't pack any of the company manuals or the cheap Meridian logistics pens. He carefully packed a framed photo of Lily, a small ceramic mug she had painted for him that said, "World's Best Dad," and a small potted succulent. Chad leaned against a nearby pillar, sipping his iced macchiato, thoroughly enjoying the show. "Don't forget your stapler, Tommy boy," Chad mocked loudly enough for the whole floor to hear. "Hey, if you need a job, I hear the Starbucks down the street is hiring. I'll put in a good word for you. You make a decent coffee." Tom didn't look at him. He tucked the box under his arm. As he walked toward the elevator, Brenda Walsh stood by the doors, a clipboard in hand. "Your security badge," she demanded, holding out her hand. Tom unclipped the plastic badge from his belt and dropped it into her palm. "You're going to regret this, Brenda." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Good luck in the real world, Mr. Harper." The elevator doors closed, cutting off the smirking faces of the people who thought they had just ruined his life. Tom walked out into the gloomy Seattle afternoon. The rain was coming down harder now, washing over the concrete. He walked across the massive corporate plaza, stopping at a concrete bench far away from the security cameras of the lobby. He placed his cardboard box down. For 3 years, he had endured. He had swallowed his pride, taken the abuse, accepted the meager pay, all to hide from a world that had taken his wife. He had wanted to prove to himself that he could survive at the bottom, that he could be a normal father for Lily without relying on the billions Clara had left him. But the world at the bottom was cruel. It was run by petty tyrants who crushed the vulnerable for sport. They had threatened Lily's health. That was their fatal mistake. Tom reached into the inner breast pocket of his coat. He bypassed his cheap, cracked Android phone. From a hidden zipper pocket, he pulled out a sleek, custom-encrypted satellite smartphone, a device that had not been powered on in 36 months. He pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, connecting instantly to a private network. There was only one contact saved in the phone. He pressed call. It rang exactly once before it was picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was sharp, aristocratic, and commanded instant respect. It was Victoria Kensington, CEO of Kensington Holdings, currently sitting in a penthouse office in Manhattan. "Victoria," Tom said. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the speaker. "Thomas, my God, it's been 3 years. I didn't even know if this number still worked. Where are you? Is Lily okay?" "Lily is fine, Victoria. She's getting big." Tom's voice was utterly devoid of the meekness he had worn all morning. It was commanding, resonant, the voice of a king returning from exile. "Why are you calling, Tom? You told me you would never use this line unless it was an absolute emergency." "I'm calling because I'm standing outside the Seattle branch of Meridian Logistics," Tom said, watching the rain hit the pavement. "Meridian? That's one of our Tier 2 subsidiaries. What are you doing there?" "I've been working there, Level 3 data analyst, under the name Thomas Harper." Victoria paused, her brilliant mind quickly processing the information. "You own 51% of the entire global conglomerate, and you've been doing data entry for a regional logistics branch?" She let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "God, you are exactly like Clara. What happened, Thomas?" "They just fired me," Tom said flatly. Silence hung on the line for a long, heavy moment. "I'm sorry," Victoria finally said, her voice dangerously low. "Someone in my company fired the majority shareholder of Kensington Holdings. For cause," Tom added. "They falsely accused me of embezzling funds to cover up the theft of a junior VP named Chad Montgomery. The branch manager, Richard Davies, and the HR director, Brenda Walsh, facilitated it. They canceled my health insurance knowing my daughter has a pre-existing medical condition. The silence that followed this time wasn't shocked. It was lethal. The temperature in Victoria's Manhattan office seemed to plummet through the phone. Victoria Kensington loved her niece fiercely, and she was ruthlessly protective of the empire her sister had built. "Give me the names again," Victoria said, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. "Richard Davies, Chad Montgomery, Brenda Walsh. I have their files pulled up," Victoria said smoothly. "Davies is a bloated middle manager. Montgomery is a legacy hire. His father is a golf buddy of the VP of West Coast Operations. Walsh is a corporate drone. I want them gone, Victoria." "Done. I'll have corporate HR terminate them by the end of the day." "No," Tom said, his voice hardening into steel. "Not the end of the day, now, and not by corporate HR. I want you to freeze their keycards, lock them out of the system. I want you to initiate a full forensic audit of the Seattle branch, starting 10 minutes ago. I want Montgomery's embezzlement handed over to federal authorities, and I want Davies and Walsh named as co-conspirators for covering it up." "Thomas," Victoria smiled on the other end of the line. "It is so incredibly good to have you back. Fire every one of them, Victoria, and send the corporate jet to Boeing Field. I need to take Lily to the best pediatric specialist in the country, and then I'm coming back to work. Consider it done. Give me exactly 5 minutes, Thomas." Tom hung up the phone. He looked up at the towering glass building of Meridian Logistics. He picked up his small cardboard box and walked slowly back toward the revolving doors. He wasn't leaving. He was going to watch it burn. Foruham. Part 4. The Lockdown. Up on the 42nd floor, the atmosphere in Richard Davies' corner office was downright celebratory. The storm brewing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was a stark contrast to the smug satisfaction radiating from the 3 people inside. Richard had poured 2 fingers of expensive scotch for himself and Chad Montgomery, while Brenda Walsh sipped a sparkling water, her tablet resting efficiently on her lap. "To a record-breaking quarter," Richard toasted, clinking his heavy crystal glass against Chad's. "And to trimming the fat," Chad chuckled, taking a long sip. "I thought Harper was going to cry when you mentioned his kid, Brenda. Classic. The guy has been a wet blanket since day one. Good riddance." "It was the necessary move to protect the department," Brenda said smoothly, adjusting her glasses. "With Harper gone, we can effectively reallocate the budget discrepancies to his terminated accounts. By the time quarterly audits roll around next month, the paper trail will end at a disgruntled, fired employee. It's clean." Chad pulled out his phone, already browsing a luxury travel website. "Perfect, because this Horizon contract means I've definitely earned a client outreach trip to Cabo next weekend. Just me, 2 models, and the corporate Amex. You want me to bring you back some tequila, Richard? Just make sure you expense it under logistics research." Richard smirked. Chad tapped his screen, inputting the 16-digit corporate card number to secure the first-class flights and the beachfront villa. He hit Confirm Purchase. A red banner flashed across his phone. Transaction declined. Account frozen. Chad frowned, tapping the screen aggressively. "That's weird. The card was declined." "You probably hit your daily limit, Chad. You bought those custom golf clubs yesterday," Richard said, walking over to his mahogany desk to check his emails. He jiggled his mouse to wake up the dual monitors. They didn't wake up to his inbox. Instead, both screens illuminated with a harsh, glaring crimson background. In the center, a stark white padlock icon pulsed rhythmically. Beneath it, bold black text read, "Critical System Lockout. Kensington Global Security initiated." Richard's brow furrowed. He pounded the escape key. He pressed Control-Alt-Delete. Nothing happened. The keyboard was entirely unresponsive. What the hell is this? Did it push a firewall update in the middle of the day? Before anyone could answer, Brenda's tablet emitted a sharp, shrill beep. She looked down, her perfectly manicured fingernails flying across the screen. "Richard," Brenda's voice lost its icy composure, replaced by a sudden, sharp edge of panic. "My administrative access just vanished. I'm locked out of the HR portal. I'm locked out of payroll. Call downstairs," Richard ordered, reaching for his desk phone. He picked up the receiver. There was no dial tone. just a hollow, dead silence. Clack! The heavy magnetic locks on the thick glass doors of the executive suite engaged with a loud final sound. The internal blinds, controlled by the smart office system, suddenly whirred to life, sliding shut and sealing them in from the bullpen outside. "My phone has no signal," Chad said, holding his device up to the window. "It's completely dead. Not even the company Wi-Fi is showing up." Richard felt the first cold prickle of genuine fear crawl up his spine. Kensington Global Security was the untouchable, god-tier IT division operating out of Manhattan. They didn't bother with Tier 2 subsidiaries like Meridian Logistics unless there was a catastrophic, company-ending data breach. "Brenda, use your cell phone. Call regional headquarters in Los Angeles," Richard demanded, his voice rising. Brenda pulled her personal phone from her purse. She dialed the number for Arthur Garrison, the vice president of West Coast Operations. The line rang twice before a pre-recorded automated voice answered. "We are sorry. The employee profile associated with this cellular device has been permanently deactivated. This device will now undergo a remote factory wipe to protect proprietary corporate data." Brenda dropped the phone as if it had caught fire. Before their eyes, the screen went black, and the Apple logo appeared with a loading bar beneath it. Her personal phone, which she used to log into the company server, was being wiped clean. "What is happening?" Chad yelled, his arrogant facade crumbling entirely. "Open the doors, Richard! Open the damn doors!" Richard lunged for the glass doors, yanking on the stainless steel handles. They didn't budge. The magnetic lock held them fast. He swiped his gold-level keycard against the reader. "Batuntor." A red light flashed. "Access denied." "We're locked in," Richard breathed, the scotch turning sour in his stomach. The realization was slow, suffocating, and terrifying. This wasn't a glitch. This was a targeted surgical strike. Someone with absolute, unprecedented power had just severed them from the world, stripped them of their authority, and locked them in a glass cage. But who? Down in the lobby, Tom Harper stood calmly as the revolving doors spun behind him. He wasn't wearing the posture of a beaten man anymore. His shoulders were back, his spine straight. The worn beige trench coat suddenly looked less like a symbol of poverty and more like a disguise he was finally shedding. The security desk was manned by Stan, a burly ex-Marine who had escorted Tom out barely 20 minutes ago. Stan stood up, placing a hand on his radio. "Mr. Harper, you know you can't be back in here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call the police." Tom didn't slow his pace. He walked directly toward the security turnstiles. "Check your terminal, Stan." "Excuse me?" "Check your terminal," Tom repeated, his voice echoing with an authority that made Stan instinctively pause. Frowning, the guard looked down at his primary monitor. A high-priority flashing directive from Kensington Global Security sat in the center of the screen, overriding all local protocols. It featured Tom's photo, but the name underneath was not Thomas Harper. Clearance level, Omega, majority shareholder, Thomas Kensington. Do not impede. Do not question. Provide immediate escort if requested. Stan's jaw went slack. He looked from the screen to the man in the frayed coat. The Marine in him recognized an apex predator when he saw one. He swallowed hard, immediately stepping away from the turnstiles and swiping his MasterCard to lock them open. "Apologies, Mr. Kensington," Stan stammered. "I had no idea." "You were doing your job, Stan," Tom said evenly as he passed through. "More than I can say for the people upstairs." Tom stepped into the private executive elevator, a lift he supposedly didn't have access to. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. A green light scanned his print, recognized the dormant DNA profile coded into the very foundation of the building's architecture, and shot him upward to the 42nd floor. When the elevator doors parted, the bullpen was in absolute chaos. Over 100 employees were standing at their desks. Every computer screen had gone to black. The phones were dead. The printers had stopped. It was as if the digital heart of the company had flatlined. Tom walked slowly down the main aisle. No one noticed him at first. They were too busy staring at the locked, blinded glass of Richard Davies' office, wondering why their bosses were trapped inside, pounding on the glass. Suddenly, the 4 massive 80-inch monitors mounted on the walls of the bullpen, screens usually reserved for logistics tracking and stock tickers, flickered to life. The chaotic murmur of the office instantly died. On the screens was a high-definition, live video feed of a breathtaking office overlooking Central Park. Sitting behind a sleek marble desk was Victoria Kensington. She looked immaculate, terrifying, and utterly furious. "Attention, Meridian Logistics Seattle branch," Victoria's voice boomed through the overhead PA system, crisp and crystal clear. In his locked office, Richard Davies practically threw himself against the glass, staring at the monitor visible through the gaps in the blinds. He recognized her instantly. Every employee of the conglomerate did. She was the queen on the throne. The blinds to Richard's office suddenly snapped open automatically, exposing Richard, Chad, and Brenda to the entire floor. "My name is Victoria Kensington," the CEO said, "effective exactly 4 minutes ago. A complete forensic audit and federal investigation was initiated into this branch. Richard Davies, Chad Montgomery, and Brenda Walsh. Step out of your office." The magnetic lock on Richard's door clicked off. Trembling, sweating through his Armani suit, Richard pushed the door open. Chad followed, looking like he was about to vomit. Brenda clutched her wiped phone like a lifeline. They stepped out into the bullpen, surrounded by 100 silent, staring employees. "Miss Kensington!" Richard shouted toward the nearest monitor, his voice cracking with desperation. "Miss Kensington, there must be some mistake. We are experiencing a massive technical failure." "The only failure here, Richard, is you," Victoria interrupted, her voice slicing through the air like a guillotine. "For the last 6 months, Chad Montgomery has embezzled over $200,000 of company funds for personal luxury expenses. And rather than report this, you and Brenda Walsh conspired to alter the financial ledgers and pin the theft on an innocent employee." Gasps rippled through the bullpen. Daniel, a senior logistics coordinator who sat near Tom's old desk, glared at Chad with pure disgust. Chad raised his hands, his face pale. No, that's a lie. The data analyst, Thomas Harper, he did it. We just fired him today for it. We have the files." "You have forged files," Victoria corrected coldly. "Our global forensic team cracked your localized server in 30 seconds. We have the metadata, Chad. We have the IP addresses of your personal laptop altering the expense reports at 2:02 a.m. Chad's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of a cubicle to keep from falling. "But you didn't just commit corporate fraud," Victoria continued, leaning forward, her eyes narrowing. "You terminated an employee with cause to deny him severance. You maliciously canceled his health insurance, knowing full well his young daughter requires critical, life-saving medical care. You thought you were crushing a nobody. You thought you were untouchable." "Miss Kensington, please," Brenda begged, tears welling in her eyes. "I was just following Richard's orders. He threatened my job." "Save it for the federal prosecutors, Brenda," Victoria snapped. "Because you made one fatal miscalculation. The man you fired is not Thomas Harper." The entire office held its breath. "Allow me to introduce the majority shareholder of Kensington Holdings, the owner of this building, the owner of Meridian Logistics, and your boss." Victoria looked slightly off camera. From the back of the bullpen, the crowd parted. Tom walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. He stopped 10 feet away from Richard, Chad, and Brenda. The beige trench coat hung loosely on him, but his presence was colossal. Richard stared at Tom, his brain refusing to process the reality in front of him. The quiet, grieving man who brought him coffee. The man he had mocked. "Thomas Kensington?" Richard whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "My late wife built this empire, Richard," Tom said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I stepped away to raise our daughter in peace. I came to work here because I wanted to understand the ground floor of her legacy. I wanted to see how the people who made this company run were treated. Tom looked at Chad, who was now openly weeping. You threatened my daughter's life today, Chad. You tried to use her medical condition as a weapon to cover your own greed. Tom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, man. Please. Chad sobbed. You're not sorry you did it, Tom said mercilessly. You're only sorry you picked the wrong victim. Tom turned back to the main monitor. Are they here, Victoria? They just arrived on your floor, Thomas, Victoria replied softly. The elevator doors pinged open. 10 men and women in dark suits stepped out. Half of them wore windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow letters across the back. The other half wore the tactical black suits of Kensington elite corporate security. The lead FBI agent walked directly up to Richard, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Richard Davies, Chad Montgomery, Brenda Walsh, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. The sound of the ratcheting handcuffs was the loudest noise in the room. Brenda wailed. Chad sobbed uncontrollably as a federal agent roughly patted him down. Richard just stared at Tom, completely hollowed out. A man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings violently ripped off. Take them out, Tom ordered quietly, and take the service elevator. I don't want them seen in my lobby. As the agents hauled the 3 disgraced executives away, the heavy silence remained over the bullpen. 120 employees stood frozen, staring at the undercover billionaire in their midst. Some looked terrified, wondering if they had ever accidentally slighted him in the break room. Tom turned to face the room. He let out a long, heavy breath, the intense boardroom persona softening just a fraction. Nobody panic, Tom said, his voice returning to the gentle tone they were used to. Your jobs are secure. The company servers will reboot in 10 minutes. Your health insurance, your pensions, your salaries, everything is safe. He scanned the crowd and locked eyes with Daniel, the senior coordinator who had always been kind to him, who had once covered his shift when Lily had a fever. Daniel, Tom called out. Daniel jumped slightly. Yes, Mr. Kensington? It's just Tom, Daniel. Effective immediately, you are the interim branch manager of Seattle Logistics. Victoria's office will send you the paperwork by end of day. Your salary is tripled. First order of business. Approve the overtime for the data entry team and cater lunch for the whole floor tomorrow. Daniel's eyes widened in shock, but a massive smile broke out across his face. Yes, sir. Thank you, Tom. Tom nodded. He looked back at the giant monitor where Victoria was still watching. Thank you, Victoria. I'll see you soon. Give Lily a kiss for me, Thomas. She smiled warmly before the feed cut, returning the screens to the normal, mundane stock tickers. Tom didn't bother going back to his desk to pack his things. He had already taken the only items that mattered. He walked back to the private elevator, leaving the awe-struck office behind. An hour later, Tom's beat-up sedan pulled up to the front of Lily's elementary school. The rain had cleared, leaving the Seattle air crisp and clean. He waited by the chain-link fence as the bell rang. A few moments later, Lily came running out, her bright yellow raincoat flapping behind her, her blonde curls bouncing. "Daddy!" she yelled, throwing her arms around his legs. Tom scooped her up, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of strawberries and rain. For a moment, the billions of dollars, the corporate espionage, the arrests, it all melted away. He was just a father holding his entire world. "Hey, Ladybug," he whispered, holding her tight. "How was school?" "Good, we painted. Did you bring pizza?" "Better," Tom smiled, carrying her toward a sleek, black, armored SUV that had silently pulled up behind his old sedan. A chauffeur in a dark suit stood by the open door. "We're going to take a trip, Lily, a big trip." Lily looked at the massive car, her eyes wide. "Are we going in that?" "We are. And then we're going to fly on a very special airplane. You're going to see Aunt Victoria in New York, and we're going to see a really nice doctor who's going to help your breathing get all better." "Will it hurt?" she asked, clutching his collar. "No, sweetie, Daddy's got you, I promise." Tom buckled her into the luxurious leather back seat. He slid in next to her. The driver smoothly pulled it away from the curb, leaving the battered sedan behind forever. 20 minutes later, the SUV bypassed the main terminals of SeaTac Airport and drove directly onto the tarmac of Boeing Field. Waiting for them was Kensington 1, a massive custom-built Gulfstream G650ER. The tail was painted midnight blue with a subtle silver K. A private medical team was already waiting at the base of the stairs, smiling warmly at Lily as Tom carried her up. Inside, the jet was a palace of cream leather, polished mahogany, and state-of-the-art medical monitoring equipment cleverly disguised as luxury recliners. Once Lily was settled in the back cabin, happily watching a cartoon on a massive screen with a pediatric nurse beside her, Tom walked to the front of the plane. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands finally shaking a little as the adrenaline of the day began to wear off. The encrypted satellite phone in his pocket vibrated. He pulled it out. It was Victoria again. "Are you in the air yet?" she asked. "Just taxiing," Tom replied, sinking into a plush leather seat. "Lily's doing great. She's excited to see you." "Good. Because I need you in New York yesterday, Thomas." The warmth was gone from Victoria's voice, replaced by the razor-sharp tone of a wartime CEO. Tom sat up straight, the fatigue vanishing. "What's wrong?" "The forensic team didn't stop with Chad Montgomery," Victoria said, the sound of furious keyboard clacking in the background. "When they cracked Chad's accounts, they found a secondary ledger hidden beneath his petty embezzlement. Chad wasn't just stealing to go to Vegas. He was funneling massive amounts of Meridian logistical data, client routes, pricing algorithms, our entire Pacific Northwest strategy, to a shell corporation." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Corporate espionage? Who owns the shell company?" "It gets worse," Victoria said grimly. "The shell company is a front for Apex Global, our biggest competitor. And the money they paid Chad for the data wasn't going into his bank account. It was being routed to an offshore trust owned by his father, Robert Montgomery." Tom gripped the phone tighter. Robert Montgomery was the best friend of Arthur Garrison, Kensington's vice president of West Coast operations. "Arthur is involved," Tom said, the pieces instantly snapping together in his tactical mind. "Arthur approved all of Chad's promotions," Victoria confirmed. "Arthur bypassed corporate oversight to keep Richard Davies in power, because Richard was too stupid to realize Chad was stealing data right under his nose. Thomas, Arthur Garrison is trying to orchestrate a hostile buyout of the entire Western Division by tanking our logistics contracts from the inside. We have a massive rat in the upper echelon." Tom looked out the window as the jet engines roared to life, the plane lifting off the wet Seattle runway, piercing through the gray clouds into the brilliant sunlight above. He had wanted to stay hidden. He had wanted peace. But they had come for his daughter's safety, and in doing so they had woken up the monster that built the empire. "Arthur Garrison is attending the annual shareholder gala in Manhattan on Friday, isn't he?" Tom asked, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. "He is. He expects to present the West Coast losses to the board and blame regional mismanagement." "Let him," Tom said softly. "Let him stand up in front of the board, because I'm going to be sitting at the head of that table. Are we going to war, Thomas?" Tom watched the Seattle skyline shrink beneath them. "No, Victoria, it's an extermination." The pediatric wing of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City was a sanctuary of hushed voices, bright pastel walls, and the world's leading medical minds. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Kensington was not worried about a copay, a deductible, or an out-of-network charge. He had simply handed the hospital administrator a black titanium American Express card and told them to prepare the premier private suite. Dr. Harrison Miller, the nation's top pediatric pulmonologist, stepped out of Lily's room, pulling his surgical mask down. He offered Tom a warm, reassuring smile. "The procedure was flawless, Mr. Kensington," Dr. Miller said, shaking Tom's hand. "We removed the localized scar tissue obstructing her lower bronchi. Her oxygen saturation is already at 99%. With a few weeks of targeted physical therapy, she will be running, swimming and playing without a single restriction. Tom closed his eyes, the crushing weight of 1,000 sleepless nights finally lifting off his chest. "Thank you, doctor. More than I can ever express." "She's asking for you," the doctor smiled, stepping aside. Tom walked into the room. Lily was propped up on a bed of fluffy pillows, an array of monitors humming quietly in the background. But her skin, usually pale and drawn, already had a rosy, vibrant flush. "Daddy," she grinned, holding up a small stuffed bear the nurses had given her. I breathed deep. It didn't hurt. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, carefully pulling her into a gentle hug. "I knew you could do it, brave girl. You rest up now. Aunt Victoria is bringing you all the ice cream in Manhattan as soon as you wake up from your nap." Lily yawned, her eyelids drooping under the residual effects of the anesthesia. "Are you going to the big building again, Daddy?" "I am," Tom said softly, his hazel eyes darkening with a fierce, protective resolve. "But I'm not fetching coffee this time, Ladybug. Daddy has to go fix some things." He waited until she fell into a deep, healing sleep. Then, Tom stood up and walked out into the corridor. Two towering men in tailored black suits, Kensington elite security, nodded respectfully as he passed. "No one gets on this floor without my direct authorization," Tom instructed the lead guard. "Not hospital staff, not board members, no one." "Understood, sir," the guard replied instantly. Tom took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage, where a waiting Maybach transported him to the glass and steel monolith of Kensington Tower in Lower Manhattan. When Tom stepped out of the private penthouse elevator on the 80th floor, Victoria was waiting for him. She didn't say a word. She simply handed him a heavy crystal tumbler of 20-year-old Macallan and led him into her cavernous office. Laid out on her massive mahogany desk was a custom-tailored, midnight blue Tom Ford suit. Next to it was a platinum Patek Philippe watch, the exact watch Clara had given him on their 5th wedding anniversary. "The frayed beige trench coat served its purpose, Thomas," Victoria said smoothly, taking a sip of her own drink. "But if you are walking into the annual shareholder meeting in 3 hours, you need to look like the apex predator you are." Tom unbuttoned his cheap synthetic blend shirt, tossing it into a nearby trash can. He began to dress in silence. The perfectly cut Italian wool slipped over his shoulders like armor. He fastened the platinum watch to his wrist. When he turned to face the floor-to-ceiling mirror, the transformation was absolute. The beaten-down, invisible data analyst was dead. The majority shareholder had resurrected. "Have the auditors finished compiling the data on Arthur Garrison?" Tom asked, adjusting his silk tie. Victoria walked over to a secure terminal and hit a key. A massive screen on the wall illuminated, detailing a complex web of financial transfers. "It's worse than we thought," Victoria stated, pointing to the screen. Arthur Garrison and Robert Montgomery didn't just steal data. They engaged in a systematic campaign to devalue Meridian Logistics so Apex Global could purchase our infrastructure for pennies on the dollar. Victoria tapped a button, bringing up a bulleted list of the damage. Sabotaged supply routes. Arthur deliberately rerouted high-yield freight through heavily congested rail lines, intentionally incurring late fees to artificially inflate operating costs. Fabricated fleet maintenance. He authorized $4.2 million in phantom repairs for delivery trucks that never went into the shop. The Horizon contract. This was their final play. They intended for Chad to botch the presentation, lose the $20 million contract, and send the quarterly projections into a fatal tailspin. "You saved that contract, Thomas." Victoria looked at him, her eyes gleaming with predatory pride. "By doing Chad's job, you accidentally delayed their entire hostile takeover." "Where is Arthur now?" Tom asked. "Downstairs, in the executive boardroom," Victoria replied, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "He's currently serving caviar to the board of directors. He plans to take the floor at 2:40 p.m., present the manufactured losses, and demand a vote of no confidence in my leadership of the logistics division." He brought Robert Montgomery with him as an independent consultant to pitch the Apex Global buyout. Tom finished his drink, setting the crystal glass on the desk with a heavy clack. Let's not keep them waiting. The executive boardroom of Kensington Holdings was a theater of immense power. The room featured a 60-foot table carved from a single slab of reclaimed walnut. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. 12 board members, billionaires, industry titans, and ruthless hedge fund managers sat around the table, murmuring over their leather-bound dossiers. At the far end of the room stood Arthur Garrison. He was a man in his late 50s, possessing silver hair, a forced, charismatic smile, and the arrogant swagger of a man who believed he was holding a royal flush. Seated to his right was Robert Montgomery, a bloated, wealthy man who reeked of cigar smoke and unearned privilege. Arthur tapped a silver pen against his water glass to command the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Arthur began, his voice dripping with faux sorrow. "I asked for the floor today because we are facing a crisis of leadership and a crisis of profitability on the West Coast." He clicked a remote, and the massive screen behind him lit up with dismal red line graphs. "Despite my best efforts to right the ship, Meridian Logistics is hemorrhaging capital. Our operating costs are up 22%. Our fleet maintenance is astronomical. The corporate culture is toxic, resulting in severe employee turnover. Just yesterday, we had to terminate our regional VP, Chad Montgomery, and our Seattle branch manager due to intense, sudden psychological breakdowns." The lie was so smooth, it was almost an art form. Arthur was spinning the arrests of his co-conspirators as a localized HR issue to cover his tracks. "We are bleeding," Arthur continued, resting his hands firmly on the table. "And as much as I respect Victoria Kensington's vision, she is an East Coast CEO. She does not understand the brutal realities of Pacific logistics. I am officially proposing that we cut our losses. We sell Meridian Logistics to Apex Global. They have offered us a generous buyout package that will insulate the shareholders from this disaster." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the board members. To them, it was just math. Red numbers meant sell. "I second the motion," Robert Montgomery chimed in smoothly. "As an independent consultant, I have reviewed the Apex offer. It is a golden parachute. If we do not vote on this today, Meridian will be bankrupt by Q4. Arthur looked toward the massive double oak doors at the front of the room. He was waiting for Victoria to walk in and fight a losing battle. He was ready to humiliate her, to strip away her power, and to finalize his theft. The heavy doors slowly swung open. But it wasn't Victoria who walked in alone. Victoria entered first, her posture impeccable, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. But the room's oxygen seemed to vanish as the man behind her stepped into the light. Thomas Kensington walked into the boardroom. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a lion stepping into its territory. The bespoke Tom Ford suit immaculate, his gaze cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm. The older board members, those who had been with the company since Clara founded it, immediately went pale. They recognized him. Arthur Garrison, however, frowned in irritation. "Excuse me. This is a closed-door executive session. Security is supposed to clear the floor. Who the hell are you?" Tom ignored him. He walked the entire length of the 60-foot table. Board members practically pressed themselves into their chairs to get out of his way. Tom reached the head of the table. The grand leather chair that had sat empty for 3 years. He didn't sit. He stood behind it, resting his hands on the backrest, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "My name is Thomas Kensington," Tom said, his voice quiet, yet it commanded the room like a thunderclap. "I own 51% of the voting shares of this conglomerate, which means, Arthur, I am the only vote in this room that actually matters." Arthur's arrogant facade cracked, his face draining of color. "Thomas Kensington? But you're a ghost. You abdicated. You haven't been involved in company operations since Clara passed." "I took a leave of absence to raise my daughter," Tom corrected him sharply. But I never stopped watching. I spent the last 6 months working inside the Seattle branch of Meridian Logistics, Level 3 data analyst. Robert Montgomery gasped, the color rushing out of his face as he realized what that meant. Chad's branch. You, Arthur stammered, his silver tongue suddenly turning to lead. You were working in data entry? That's impossible. It's amazing what people will say in front of a man they think is invisible, Tom said, stepping away from the chair and walking slowly toward Arthur. They will openly mock him. They will force him to do their jobs. And in your son's case, Robert, they will actively forge financial ledgers and attempt to frame that invisible man for their own embezzlement. Robert Montgomery shot up from his chair. My son is a vice president. He is a good boy. You have no proof of this absurd slander. Your son, Tom countered, his voice rising in volume, is currently sitting in a federal holding cell in Seattle, awaiting a bail hearing for wire fraud and corporate espionage. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Board members shouted, demanding answers. Victoria raised a hand, and the room instantly silenced. Tom reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek, black flash drive. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished walnut and stopped right in front of Arthur. I don't need a presentation, Arthur, Tom stated. I brought receipts. Tom tapped a button on the table's master console, overriding Arthur's presentation. The red line graphs vanished. They were replaced by high-resolution scans of offshore bank statements, encrypted emails, and wire transfer receipts. Let's look at the real numbers, Tom addressed the board, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Arthur Garrison and Robert Montgomery established a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands called Nautical Horizons. Over the last 8 months, Arthur has intentionally sabotaged our fleet maintenance and supply routes, transferring $4.2 million of our capital into this shell. Arthur backed away from the screen, sweat beading on his forehead. This is fabricated. I am a victim of a cyber attack. We have the IP addresses, Arthur, Victoria interjected coldly. Your personal laptop, logged into the corporate VPN from your residence in Bel Air. We also have the recorded phone calls between you and the CEO of Apex Global, negotiating your $10 million kickback for forcing this sale today. But that's not what offends me the most, Tom said, stepping within 3 feet of Arthur. The sheer physical presence of the billionaire made the corrupt executive shrink back against the glass windows. What offends me, Tom whispered dangerously, is that you let your idiot middle managers threaten my daughter's health insurance to cover up your theft. Robert Montgomery panicked. He bolted for the oak doors, abandoning his friend, abandoning his son, desperate to escape the slaughter. He threw the doors open. Waiting in the hallway were 6 FBI agents, standing shoulder to shoulder with Kensington's private security force. Robert Montgomery? The lead agent asked, stepping forward with handcuffs unclipped. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage and federal wire fraud. No, I'm just a consultant. Arthur made me do it, Robert screamed, instantly turning on his partner as the agent slammed him against the wall, cuffing him. Inside the boardroom, Arthur Garrison realized he was trapped. The kingdom he had tried to steal had just dropped the guillotine on his neck. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into a leather chair, burying his face in his hands. 2 more agents walked into the room, flanking Arthur and pulling him roughly to his feet. Arthur Garrison, Tom said, watching the man being handcuffed. You are officially terminated, without severance, without a pension, and Kensington Holdings will be launching a civil suit against you for damages that will ensure you cannot afford a cup of coffee for the rest of your miserable life. As the agents dragged a weeping Arthur out of the boardroom, the heavy doors clicked shut, plunging the room into a stunned, deafening silence. The 12 board members sat paralyzed, staring at Tom. They had come to the meeting expecting a dry financial presentation and a simple vote. Instead, they had witnessed a bloodbath. They had witnessed the terrifying return of the king. Tom walked slowly back to the head of the table. He pulled out the grand leather chair. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Kensington sat down at the head of the empire. He smoothed his tie, looked around the table, and offered a sharp predator's smile. Now, Tom said, his voice calm, businesslike, and entirely in control. Let's talk about our Q4 projections. 6 months later, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, casting a warm golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tom's new executive office in the rebuilt Seattle branch. The toxic culture was gone. Daniel, the new regional VP, was thriving. The company was posting record profits, but as Tom sat behind his desk, reviewing a logistics contract, his attention was not on the billions. The office door burst open. Lily ran in, her cheeks flushed, carrying a brightly colored kite. There was no wheezing, no coughing, just the bright, boundless energy of a healthy child. "Daddy, the wind is perfect, you promised!" Tom smiled, closing his laptop. He didn't care that he had a conference call with Tokyo in 10 minutes. The call could wait. The empire could wait. He had already proven that he could crush anyone who threatened his family. Now, it was time to enjoy the peace he had violently secured. "I did promise, didn't I?" Tom laughed, standing up and grabbing his coat. "Let's go fly a kite, Ladybug." He took her hand, walking out of the office, leaving the corporate world behind. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry, and a ruthless CEO. But above all, he was exactly what Clara had always loved most about him. He was Lily's dad, and heaven help anyone who ever forgot it again. If you thought arrogance and cruelty would win, think again. Thomas Harper's journey from a bullied, grieving single father to a ruthless billionaire reclaiming his empire proves that the quietest people often hold the ultimate power. True leaders protect their family first and let karma, or a team of federal agents, handle the rest. What would you do if you secretly owned the company that fired you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this story of ultimate corporate revenge, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas.